Señor Ulrich.
Hi, hi Ulrich, how are you?
I'm very fine, Lilia, and I'm very happy to see you and to talk with you. And also, I'm feel very honored to be part of your conference on peace. Which peace? Because you may be interested, when I started my work after university training, I started first in an institute, an interdisciplinary institute, and this was the first peace research institute in Germany at that time.
Oh, wow.
So I'm very much, my heart is very much with peace and justice. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. First of all, greetings to the conference. I feel very much honored, and I think of two cases where I was present in your university. You remember, Lilia?
I remember.
So we had big audience, a big group of people in the university, and I would much prefer to be there, especially also it is hot in your country, and here we have ice and snow. So thank you very much for the honor to be among you and to share some of the experiences. Just briefly, when I started my work after university, I was part of an interdisciplinary institute, which was the first peace research institute in Germany. We cooperated with Galtungs Institute in Norway, and also with peace research and peace groups in Netherlands. And it was in the 70s then that we developed a kind of grassroots network of peace groups and a movement, because you may know that at the end of the 1970s and early 80s, there was this arms build-up in Europe against Russia, against the Soviet Union. And so we had a very, very big peace movement. I just remember that as we had prepared the networking among the peace groups, then when we came together at a so-called Kirchentag, which is a big rally every second year, so when we came together in 79, when this whole started, we had, because of that kind of networking, we had 90,000 people, the first big European peace demonstration, which was followed up with even more people, etc. But I simply wanted to say the first lesson I learned, it took 15 years in order to build up a grassroots peace network, a movement. And then when it came to this kind of rearmament situation, we had this really big peace movement. And with that in the background, my experience, I came to the World Council of Churches Assembly in Vancouver in 1983. And before that, we had already started building also networks from the grassroots level for justice, peace, integrity of creation, because we saw all these issues are very much interlinked. Today, everybody knows this, but at that time, that was a new approach. And so we started that process called a process of mutual commitment, etc. And what we found out there was that in the center of injustice, war and armament, etc., and also destruction of nature, is the global capitalist world system, which is framed by imperial, violent means, like all the the military bases, like you have a lot of them right now in Colombia. And so that was very much the situation, and we in the churches and all the peace movement, we realized that. So since then, we somehow kept those issues, peace, justice, and creation, together via developing ways towards peace for life and economy of life, you know. So in that sense, that was a work of 30 years. So we had in that whole period, beginning even in the late 60s, we had this building up of peace work together with justice work, together with ecological work, concentrating on critical assessment of the global economy and developing the ways towards economy of life.
Very important moment for the history of Colombia, bringing these works of peace and
right.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and we also organized in that context, we also organized a hearing in the European Parliament with you as the coordinator and with François Huttard as the somehow the tribunal moderator. And so in that sense, we have been involved for quite some time. But of course, I very much feel with you about the second betrayal after the 1980s, that again the peace process ended up in murder. In the last time, we had a very, very bad development, particularly linked to the presidency of Trump, but also on their own account in terms of the Europeans. You know that in the peace research in the 70s, Galtung, Johann Galtung, which some of you may know, wrote a book of a superpower in the making. And so Europe was somehow designed as a kind of sub-empire. And so what happened now in the last years was that under the pretext of that the NATO had decided to have 2% of the budgets, of the national budgets, given to the military budget, which is just a kind of crime, I think. It's just a crime in those times of climate crisis, pandemic, etc., etc. So there is a constant move to more military in Europe. And also they have used the Trump administration in saying, oh, we can't depend anymore on the United States. We need to build up our own military in order to intervene wherever necessary in the world. So the so-called interventions, the worldwide interventions, and also the arms race again, is something which we of course fight. But unfortunately, unlike the late 70s and early 80s, we don't have that strong movement anymore as we had in those times. We have a strong peace movement, and it also, for instance, the Easter marches every year are a kind of center. There are also conferences, council meetings, efforts. One victory is that some of the European countries, at least, signed the prohibition of atomic bombs, the treaty that was just ratified by more than 50 countries. So in that sense, there are signs of hope, but the general trend is going very much in the wrong direction. And everybody knows that this new strategy, which the NATO has developed already years ago and linked to the 2% goal of military expenditure. All this is in order to intervene for economic interests in other areas of the world. That is even in writing. You can read that since 1992 in the orders of the Ministry of Defense, that it is not anymore defense, but it is interacting whenever economic interests are involved. Of course, they give it nice names to secure the free trade of oil, etc., but it is basically for part of the United States empire. Now, the interesting thing is that, of course, now you have this new period with getting from a unipolar geopolitical system to a multipolar. But the problem is that Europe, which could build a bridge, is very much at the moment siding with the United States, anti-Russia, anti-China, etc. So we have a lot to do in the peace movement in Europe.
Yes, now you are very, very involved in the Palestinian issues. Can you tell us a little bit, because in Colombia, really few people are concerned or know a lot about Palestinian situation. Can you tell us a little bit of the history and the kind of campaign that you're doing now, please?
Yes. Yeah, this is a very hot issue. And particularly, I mean, those of you in the conference who relate to churches will have to know that in 2022, the next assembly of the World Council of Churches is coming to Germany. And it will be in Karlsruhe, half an hour from here where I now sit. So that means we have a very big chance to mobilize world Christianity on this issue, because this is also for secular people, it should be known that the misuse of the Bible, like in the former apartheid system in South Africa, is very much part of the problem in Palestine, Israel, because the Zionistic system in Israel is trying to steal the whole land and builds completely on military and violence. And so therefore it's one of the key issues in terms of peace. And it is linked into the global imperial system, because without the United States and Europe, particularly Germany, paying for the oppression of the Palestinian people to Israel every year, the Israelis could never finance their oppression. It would be much too expensive. Alone the United States gives 3.8 billion every year in military goods and cash for the military. You see, that is the occupying force. So the United States directly funds the oppression in Palestine. And so does the German taxpayer, which we very much fight against in Germany. Because, you know, under the pretext of the crimes the Germans have committed to the Jews, and the absolutely unique crime of 6 million people being killed, that is a pretext to support Israel unconditionally. So our taxpayers have to pay their submarines on which they build the missiles for their atomic bombs, you know. So it is just to give these examples, but you as peace people will realize what it means if the whole Western Empire supports the Israelis